body shape is captured really well, and it really stands out from all of the other diesels in my fleet. It's certainly an eye-catching model. Hi there everyone, it's Jenny Kirk here, welcoming you back to the channel. It's so great to see you. I hope you're doing well. And today, well, we're going to be taking a look at a model that was a special commission a few years ago now, but it is still on sale. And I managed to pick up one of these from one of the second-hand stores at Model Rail Scotland. And I'm really pleased with it, and as you'll see later on, it does have a few little issues, but, well, stay tuned and you'll find out all about that. This is the Kernow Model Centre Class 41 Diesel Pioneer from North British Locomotives, but the real ones weren't that successful. So let's see, how successful is the model version? This video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. And of course this video features a full DCC fitting guide, so scoot through towards the end if that's what you're here for, and I show you exactly how to get a DCC decoder into this model relatively trouble-free. Additional support comes from Billy's Replacement Speakers, who handle all of our merchandise, and you can see that in the store down below. We've got t-shirts, hoodies, die-cut stickers and so much more, so grab yourself some pretty decent merch and be one of the Jenny crew every time you go out with pride. Without further ado, let's take a look at this model from Kernow Model Centre. The first thing that's very obvious with this model is the box. It's very substantial, and as you can see here, it's got a good solid box that really does protect the contents well. And for me, that's always a good sign that the manufacturer really cared enough to take pride in the presentation of the model. Now KMRC has quite a distinctive box for their special commissions, so they're really easy to spot second hand in the exhibition halls on the trade stands, such as where I managed to get this from at a substantial discount. They are still available brand new, and we do have a link down below to help you find one of these either in the rail blue such as this or in the BR green versions that are still available through KMRC. This particular example is catalogue number K2600 and it's billed as D600 Warship, number D600, active, BR blue. Now active is the name of the locomotive, and these were a very small class, and I've seen them referred to as class 41. I've seen people say that they never were allocated class 41, but it's a bit moot really. They were all withdrawn by the late 60s, very early 1970s, and none of them survive. And I guess that they were an experiment that British Rail probably hoped that people would forget about. Now one of them, D601 Ark Royal, was the subject of a failed preservation attempt, which meant that it did last through until just into 1980 at Di Woodham's yard in Barry. Although from what I gather, it had been used rather a lot as a toilet by the steam boys, who were very disparaging of these diesels that they saw as having usurped their steam locomotives. Inside the box we get some details specific to this locomotive, which is a nice touch. So we see the full potted history of D600. We also get the exploded diagram, which I think these are a great idea. They show you just how much work goes into not only designing but also assembling one of these locomotives. These are not a toy train. These are a model, and a very, very highly detailed model at that. So it's really nice to see that we're getting this kind of information, and the manufacturers are taking pride in showing you just what level of work goes into the model. We also have an instruction sheet, and we'll go into this later on in the video, so if you're here looking for some advice on DCC fitting the model, then do scoot through towards the end, and we're doing a full DCC fitting guide in association with Trainomatic using their 21-pin decoder. On the other side, we've got a more general history of the class, and it is quite interesting to see what happened to them all and the shortcomings of them. In terms of a class, well, they weren't successful. North British Locomotive that built them were really struggling in this transition from going from building steam locomotives to this new technology of building diesels. And a lot of the issues seem to stem from the fact that they really just didn't seem to understand the benefits that you could build into a diesel locomotive, namely that you could make a body that was partially load-bearing, and that in turn meant that you could save a lot of weight. So it's true to say that the Class 41 suffered greatly from being overweight. The model itself has a lot of good weight to it, and actually in model form this is great for adhesion. When running this model, it actually is a far more sterling performer than the real ones probably were. And even with a long train of some 10 Mark I coaches up and down gradients here on Weir Yard, the locomotive did not struggle or slip in the slightest. She has a very characteristic North British look, and Kernow Model Centre have captured this ever so well. The body side looks very much like a stretched Class 22. Now, we did do a full review of the Dapol Class 22 that was released some years ago on the channel, and you can see from this model that it has all of the family resemblance of that North British product. We've got these doors on the side, very, very characteristic, and you can see right through in places straight out the other side as well. The actual window glazing does have that kind of Coke bottle bottom effect, but it's not too noticeable from most viewing angles. The only qualm I have is that it does allow the electronics to be fairly well visible if you look closely through these side windows, and I can't help but think that maybe having these glazing pieces just blacked out on the inside would have been a little bit of an improvement. Yes, you wouldn't have been able to see in, but really, could you see in that well on the real locomotives when they were in service? Probably not as well as you could imagine. We've got this wealth of body grille detail. Certainly there was a lot of ventilation going on the sides of these locomotives, and those very, very heavy duty bogies, which whilst they look like a cocoa bogie are actually an A1A arrangement, and certainly on the model they are just that as well. So we've got drive to the outer axles on each bogie, and as per the prototype we've got an idler in the middle. Now, this doesn't affect performance at all. As I said before, it really is a sterling performer. You can see there these really attractive etched metal nameplates on the side. On this one it says Active Warship Class, and they are actually a separately applied etched plate. Now, I'm not 100% certain whether the model comes with these factory fitted, or this is something that the previous owner of this model has very carefully applied, but I have to say, if they are factory applied, they're really nicely done, and if they were supplied ready for the user to fit, then certainly the previous owner of this model has done an incredibly good job to get those lined up on the body side. Underneath, the DC modeler is not forgotten, with these two little switches here that control the cab lights and the red marker lights, and this means that even on DC there is an element of control over the lighting, although on DCC this can all be done with a push of a button from the control pad. The model features independent cab lighting, plus rear and front lights are too. It really does make use of some of those auxiliary functions, and it's really good to see a lot of newer models coming through are embracing what DCC is able to provide to the modeler. The front face of this locomotive has that characteristic old sad eyes look, very reminiscent of the rest of the North British product range. We've also got these split markers with the head code displays in them, Again, I'm not sure how easy it is to change them, but certainly the font and the thickness of that stencil design is really well replicated, and I wouldn't really want to delve in there. They just look so perfect. In this livery with the yellow fronts, we've also got the overhead warning flashes, and I do like the look of the front of this locomotive. On my viewfinder screen on my camera, it does look rather lemon yellow, but I can assure you that the actual colour rendition on the model itself is perfect, with that slightly orangey yellow that works really, really well. The cutout for the front buffer beam has all of the holes ready for the additional detail pack, and the couplings are fitted into these self-centering NEM pockets on a spring-loaded mechanism. If you aren't applying the couplings though, you are going to need to do a little bit of surgery just to remove that if you don't want it. But for any of the regular users who want to put a coupling on either end of this using that socket, it's very easy to do. With the model comes this detailing pack, and this includes enough detailing to do the buffer beam detail on both ends of the model. But if you do add this, then it does preclude the use of the NEM couplings. We also get a pair in there which just plug fit into those NEM sockets. The performance on this locomotive is far better than I would have ever expected the real locomotives to have been. That huge chassis block that's hidden away inside there gives them a lot of adhesive weight, and I tested this with a 10-coach train of Bachmann Mark 1s, and there was no perceivable slippage, even with that A1A bogie wheel arrangement. Now, the locomotives themselves were turned out rather overweight, and they struggled with this weight issue for the entirety of their lives. Certainly North British did sort of start to get a handle on things when they turned out the Class 43s, and I'm guessing that they were just given the plans and told, build it like it shows in the paperwork and don't mess about with it, because certainly the Class 43s were a rarity of a successful, or at least vaguely successful, North British built locomotive. If we look to the roof, you can see all of the body access panels there with the actual beading on the edges really nicely defined. There's also a wealth of additional grilles, all in just the right places, and I particularly like these slightly offset grilles with the wire mesh, and you can actually see the fans down inside. So if I hold the model there like that, you can see each end is slightly offset to the left, and that means that they have quite a complex shape that has been perfectly realised by Kernow Model Centre. The handrails are metal, sitting there in the recess, and they're really quite robust. We also get a representation of the cab interior, which does look pretty reasonable, although a little bit of work with a very tiny paintbrush and some pots of Humbrol enamel would really bring that dashboard alive in there. The buffers themselves are fully sprung, and there is a wealth of other subtle but perfectly realised detail. I really do like this riveting on the side skirts, which allude to just how over-engineered the structure of this locomotive was. Looking back to the bogies, we've got that characteristic slab side heavy fabricated bogies realised so well, and I do like the representation of the suspension. And then inside we've got the prototypically correct spoked wheels, which are very characteristically North British, but I suspect it was probably more to do with trying to save any weight that they could and stop as much of the bloat as was possible in the build, but they weren't really fully successful. The brake blocks do line up with the wheels, and it's really nicely done. We also have a couple of holes underneath for maintenance purposes that allow a little dab of oil, if necessary, to be applied into the gear train. The battery box on the underside does look a little bit simplistic, but I'm guessing that it's probably more a case that we've been spoilt rotten by some other locomotives, and certainly from the side there's detail where it needs to be, and a couple of additional separately applied parts there in the form of these pipes. The windows on the cab have this great aluminium edge, and it's really neatly applied. Looking to the demarcation of the colouring, there is a little bit of fuzzying between the yellow and the blue on these nose ends, but do bear in mind that what you're seeing on your screen is several times bigger than the locomotive actually is when you hold it in your hands. The D600 and the BR double arrow are really sharply done, and I do like these overhead warning flashes, really sharp and well realised. We've got the metal grille here just underneath the cab. It's kind of checker plate, I guess, to stop wear on the paint when the crew was getting in and out. And then we've got the red circle for the multiple working code. There's no tops panel on this, which I guess adds credence to the fact that a lot of people debate whether it ever got class 41 officially, because there's no tops panel to be able to read off what class BR thought this was. But I'm not going to get into that debate. Overall, the body shape is captured really well, and it really stands out from all of the other diesels in my fleet. It's certainly an eye-catching model. It wasn't on my radar until I saw it on the table second-hand at the Doncaster show, but as soon as I saw it, I found myself falling in love with its peculiar, ugly, quite tragically sad charm. So we turn now to the DCC Fitting, and I will warn you at the start that it's not really quite as straightforward as the paperwork with the model might suggest. For this, you're going to need the 21-pin decoder, and we recommend the Kernow variety, and these can also be paired up with a smart power pack, and there is a link down below to the UK and European stockists for these. You'll also need a small jeweler's flathead screwdriver, but this isn't actually for turning any of the screws, and the use of this will become clear in a moment. One of the things that I didn't show you before is some of the other instruction sheet that comes with the locomotive. Now this gives a little bit of a clue on things like just routine maintenance, but where it falls down is where it talks about body removal, and actually it omits some very important details. If you read this, you might think there's just 4 clips and the body just pops off dead easy, but actually no, this couldn't be further from the truth, and that's a little bit disappointing because I can only assume that that leaflet must have been written with at least the pre-production of this model available to hand, and that would have made it quite clear that if you just lever out the body sides and give it a good shake, nothing actually happens. And if you're thinking that maybe it's the window mouldings are catching, trust me, I had a piece of card in here all the way up to the roof on both sides and the body still wouldn't come out. And the reason for this is because it's actually catching just behind the buffers. So what you need to do is actually lever out the buffer beam, lever in, give it a knock, and you should find that the body just starts to drop down. It's not straightforward, and there's forever this feeling that you're going to damage the locomotive. So you can see there the body has dropped, and then we can pull it back and lift it from the other end. We don't get a huge amount of spare wire in terms of these connectors, which go from the directional lighting and the cab lighting to the main circuit board, so be really careful, and that's one of the reasons that when you do take it off, make sure you're very close over something like this mat, and it's just so that it can't fall and then rip all these cables out. I've already pre-fitted this with the 21-pin decoder from Kernow, and I also took the opportunity to fit a smart power pack. The reason for this is because actually inside the model it's very generous on space. This doesn't compromise its weight, it's still a weighty locomotive, and you can see here it has space for a very large speaker if you choose to go down the sound fitted route. But I'm actually going to use this space to very easily include the smart power pack, and this has been pre-soldered to the decoder and should give us some very smooth and reliable running. The 21-pin header is here just very carefully. If it's got the blanking plate in, just rock it from side to side, gently move it up. Don't just try and take it all from one side and lever it, or you will bend the pins. And then it's a case of lining up the blanked out pinhole and just gently pushing the decoder back into place. As you can see here, this is the correct orientation. I also took the opportunity to just bend out of the way this component here. The reason for this was because it was bent underneath and was pretty much touching the decoder. And my experience is that these can get a little bit warm. So I did feel that it was probably better to just bend it over the other way. And actually, for me, it's a bit of peace of mind. Now, to get the body back on the locomotive, again, it's a little bit more involved than you might think. Just trying to slide the body back on, it won't go. And the reason for this is, again, these buffer beams are the issue. So you have to slide it in at one end like that. That's taking care of that end. And then we turn the locomotive around, and then it's simply a case of we're going to have to make sure that we just carefully lever that out, a little bit of pressure, lever out the other side. It does help having nails that aren't too short to do this, and then it will just drop in. And it does feel like you're on the verge of damaging the model. And I can't see any real need for it to be like that. And certainly the fact that the instructions don't allude to that does suggest to me that this may be an issue that has crept into the production models. And really, it's just such a shame, because a beautiful model is rendered really difficult to get into for the average modeler. When it comes to running, the model did perform pretty well. There was a little bit of notchiness at very low speeds, but this very quickly disappeared as you ramped the speed up. Slow speed shunting was certainly possible with this model, and it did handle the gradients as well as the double slips, the diamond crossings and such like here on Weir Yard, and that meant that it was pretty short-footed all the way around. That lovely degree of weight that the locomotive has also meant that it was a very sure-footed performer, and it has to be said that the model performs somewhat better than the reputation of the real locomotives. All in all, I thought that this was a pretty good package, although slightly on the expensive side when they were first released. That price is starting to look quite competitive now, as we've seen the price of models escalate very, very quickly over the last few years. The price for this model from Kernow Model Centre is currently £179.99. You have to remember that it is a special commission, and Kernow Model Rail Centre have taken all the risk to bring out a model of this locomotive, which, quite frankly, I cannot see any of the mainstream manufacturers having considered at the time that Kernow Model Centre committed to making it. Second-hand, the model is available for a variety of different prices. This particular example, I paid £129.99 in as-new condition from a second-hand vendor at one of the model rail shows, and I'm sure that you probably find it even cheaper if you're prepared to do a lot of legwork, either on Facebook selling groups or on eBay. That said, the performance more than made up for that difficulty in being able to get access into the model. And once you've fitted this locomotive, it is very much a case of fit, forget and enjoy. So we turn now to the scores. First up is build quality, and I was pretty pleased about the quality of the build, although actually there was just a couple of areas where I felt that it just seemed very, very plain, such as the tanks on the underside, but you can forgive a lot of that because you're not really going to see it an awful lot. The fit of the chassis into the body was just a little bit peculiar, and I can't help but wonder whether there's been some kind of strange change in shape of the body or the chassis during the manufacturing process. But that said, all in all, it's pretty good. None of the windows pushed in either, and this is another area where you can get issues where picking the locomotive up off the track, you accidentally squeeze the windows and they pop in. There wasn't any evidence that that was happening with this, so overall I'm going to give it an 8.7. On running quality, it was generally pretty good. The locomotive performed reasonably well at slow speed, although there was a degree of notching, but I suspect that despite being second-hand, this model has never really been run, and it may well be that a period of running in would solve a lot of that notchiness at low speed. There's a lot of weight in this model, despite some quite innovative room in there for sound setup, stay-alives, or even both. I'd wager that you could actually get quite a lot as extra inside here, but despite that, it does pack quite a punch with additional weight, and that meant that it would pull everything that I threw at it. So I'm going to give this a 9.0. On DCC Fitting and Innovation, this is the real Achilles heel of this model. It was really difficult to get the top off, and the instructions were actually less than helpful because they made no mention of those buffers that were catching at either end, just where the tumble home is underneath the cab. It was deeply frustrating the first time that I took the body off this model, and when you see it in the DCC fitting guide in this video, bear in mind that that's about the 4th or 5th time I've removed the top off this model, and even then it's quite cumbersome, and you're constantly left with a feeling that you're stressing the model and that any moment the body shell could crack under the strain. There's also a risk of scratching that yellow paint on the ends, and I just felt that this wasn't really something that we should be expecting in this day and age. It's a shame really, because that internal space that allows some real hassle-free fitting of sound installations, stay-alives, really was a good plus point. I also liked the independent cab lighting and also the means to turn on and off the red tail lights. It does have a lot of DCC functionality, but I just keep coming back to the real difficulty in getting the body off. If the instructions were a little bit more forthcoming, then that would probably alleviate some of this issue, but as it stands, I'm going to give this a 4.9. And it is that really difficult body removal that is dragging this score down. When it comes to accuracy and quality of finish, this model really does look good. They've captured the look of old sad eyes really, really well, and this has all of the characteristic hallmarks of a North British failed diesel product. Arguably, the model is so much more successful than the full-size versions. BR persevered with these, but in the end, they and their Class 22 cousins were pretty much doomed by being obsolete from the very start, built by a company that was very much wedded to the idea of steam locomotive designs and was very much floundering in this new world of diesel locomotion. So I'm going to give this a 9.5. It really does look something special and will look very different in your fleet alongside the much more mundane slab-sided locomotives that came from other manufacturers. On value for money, the locomotive is a little bit expensive on the brand new scale, but it is a special commission, and we always expect a premium on these. Add to that because Kernow Model Rail Centre is the commissioner and the sole seller, then these things don't get discounted in the same way that main range models from the big manufacturers do, so that all accounts for the price tag of £179.99. All in all, it's fairly reasonable, and as inflation pushes up the prices of brand new locomotives, it's rapidly actually looking like a really favourable price, even though it may have been considered a little bit expensive when it was brand new. As I proved, it's possible to pick up these examples in great condition really quite cheaply, and I have to say that on the same stand that I got this, the BR Green version was also available. One assumes from the same collection traded in and was in mint condition, looking like it too had never been run, so deals are out there. So I'm going to give this an 8.2. And that gives us a final score of 40.3. And it has to be noted that the score is pretty respectable, but it was pulled down by that DCC fitting. If that could be fixed, this model would really score well. And it's for that reason that I have to say that I do still fully recommend this model, despite the shortcomings of that DCC fitting. And if you're a DC modeler, well, just ignore that. Every other score is really good. So I can certainly wholeheartedly recommend this model. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video. Do you agree with the points that I've raised with this model? Is there anything that you think that I've missed? Do you disagree wholeheartedly? I'd love to hear from all of you. Do please leave a comment down below. And if you're coming to this video, have a read of the comments, because there may be some extra information there that maybe I missed in the video. And that's really how we work together great as a community. Also, don't forget that you can head on over to Patreon and help to support the channel to make the videos that you want to see. And you can also leave suggestions for the topic of future videos in the comments down below. Don't forget to tickle that like button, share this video, and also subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so, ringing that bell to be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. But until next time, you take great care of yourself, and I hope to see you then. Bye for now. Happy modelling. Today's video is sponsored by Kernow, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grantline Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N. from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, NI Railways 4000 class, Ian Coulson, Alan Dickerson, Eddie Popper, Karen Nichol, Medwin Williams, Crossways Point Junction, 3B Rail, and Jennifer Garrett. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.